Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alex Vines. I'm Director of the Africa Programme at Chatham House, and I'm delighted to be sharing today this meeting on South Africa's economic recovery beyond COVID-19. We have a speaker, in fact, we have two speakers. The first speaker is Paul Mashatile. He's the Treasurer General of the African National Congress, ANC, in South Africa, and he'll be giving a presentation for some 20 minutes. He'll be then followed by Enoch Gongongwane, who's the Chair of Economic Transformation Committee of the ANC. Both speakers don't really need any introduction. Paul Mashatile is the current Treasurer General, as I said, of the African National Congress, a position which he has held since December 2017. Prior to his election as Treasury General, he served as chairperson of the ANC in Gauteng. Enoch, as I've mentioned, is a member of the National Executive Committee, NEC of the ANC, and he's the current chairperson of the Economic Transformation Subcommittee of the NEC. Enoch has a strong background in the trade union movement, having served in various leadership positions in the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, including as its General Secretary from 1993 to 1997. This meeting is on the record, so nothing to do with the Chatham House rule. There will be time for questions and answers, so please, audience, use your hand signal to ask to be asked to ask a question when we get to Q&A. If you are wanting to tweet, you can do that. Please use the hashtag CHAfrica, and please also seek permission if you from us if you want to take a recording. Finally, unfortunately, those of you who are on Facebook Live, I have to apologize, but we won't be able to take questions from you today. So with no more ado, I would like to welcome Paul and ask him to present his thoughts about South Africa's economic recovery beyond COVID-19. Paul, thank you very much for joining this Africa Programme discussion, and I look forward to listening to you.
Thank you very much, Alex, and a good afternoon to everybody. I know, Alex, that you had invited us to come to Chatham House in April, but unfortunately, because of COVID-19, we were not able to travel with Enoch and our team. But let me send my warm greetings to everybody, including those who are watching from all over parts of the world. And I want to really take this opportunity once again to thank you, Dr. Vines, and the team for organizing this forum to reflect on the outlook of the South Africa's economy post-COVID-19. As you know, we are having this conversation at a time when the rest of the world, the continent of Africa and our country, South Africa, is engaged in this titanic battle against this invisible enemy that is destroying lives and livelihoods, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. This pandemic has changed the way we live, the way we work, and the way we interact with one another. Despite arriving late on the African continent, COVID-19 virus has spread rapidly. It is impacting on our regions, particularly the three largest economies of Nigeria, South Africa, and Angola, in a context of persistently weak growth and investment, as well as declining commodity prices. With limited public resources and overstretched health systems, Africa faces a particularly daunting task in mitigating the effects of the pandemic. The World Bank projects that growth in sub-Saharan Africa will decline from 2.4% in 2019 to between a negative 2.1% and negative 5.1% this year in 2020. It is further projected that in this year, the pandemic will cost African countries between 37 to 79 billion US dollars in terms of output losses. South Africa's GDP is expected also to contract by 6.4% in 2020, with more than 1.8 million potential job losses. It is estimated that Africa will require more than 100 billion US dollars to adequately respond to healthcare and social safety needs as a result of this pandemic. The South African government has acted swiftly, boldly, and decisively to put measures to cap the spread of the virus and to cushion its economic impact on the poor and the vulnerable. These measures include a nationwide lockdown that began on the 26th of March this year. The nationwide lockdown is currently being eased to enable the resumption of economic activity and to avert further erosion of livelihoods, while at the same time saving lives. Government has announced a more than 27 billion US dollars social and economic stabilization package intended to flatten both the curve and the pandemic and the economic downturn. This package is actually equivalent to 10% of South Africa's GDP. It includes additional spending to increase the capacity of our public healthcare services to deal with the pandemic, direct cash transfers to distressed households and firms, an increase in social transfer and grants, as well as extended credit lines and guarantees backed by government. The South African Reserve Bank has also acted decisively to support the real economy, households and firms by, amongst others, easing monetary policy and thus providing extra liquidity to capital markets. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, the South African economy was already in a recession, trapped in a cycle of low growth and high unemployment. It recorded an average growth of 1.5% over the past 5 years. A number of international credit rating agencies had lowered our long-term foreign and local currency debt ratings to below investment grade. In response to this reality, government implemented economics and structural reforms aimed at reducing the cost of doing business and unlocking growth. This includes, amongst others, reducing the time it takes to register a company to 1 day, addressing concerns regarding visa requirements, dealing with inefficiencies and congestions on our ports, reducing the time it takes to secure water use licenses, and reducing the cost of information and communication technologies. In addition, government began implementing measures to stabilize public finances, eliminate wastage, ensure value for money and efficiency of spending. We have also acted decisively to promote energy security. This includes implementing a turnaround strategy for our electricity utility, which is Eskom, as well as initiating a process of generating extra energy capacity, including through renewable energy. We have moved with speed to clear policy uncertainty in key industries such as mining. Similarly, we have begun a process of amending the Constitution to provide greater clarity and certainty in the implementation of our reform program. Our land reform program will be implemented in line with the Constitution, all legal prescripts, and of course, mindful of the imperative to promote national unity and reconciliation. We will actually seek to avoid a disruption of the economy, and we will not compromise on food security. We reiterate that there will be no land grabs in South Africa. Before COVID-19, we had also begun strengthening efforts to attract both local and foreign investments into the economy, including by eliminating barriers to sustained investments. After engagement with the private sector and the multilateral development banks, cabinets will soon approve an infrastructure project pipeline totaling more than $20.5 billion, focusing on, amongst others, improving the network industries, such as our rail and ports, the energy sector, the ICT, water and sanitation, and of course, human settlements. Work has also begun to unlock the potential of our agricultural sector as a linchpin to growth and a key input industry to manufacturing. Currently, plans are underway to repurpose and restructure state-owned enterprises to maximize their developmental impact, but also improve their commercial viability. We are continuing with the important task of fighting corruption in the public sector, but also in the private sector. In this regard, significant work is being undertaken to restructure institution of the criminal justice system to ensure that those found to have transgressed the law are brought to book. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall continue with these interventions as we rebuild the South African economy post-COVID-19. It is, however, clear that given the scale of the damage to our economy, the post-COVID-19 reconstruction effort will be no mean feat. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted that apartheid fault lines are still persistent in our economy and society. Poverty, unemployment, and inequality of income, wealth, and opportunity based on race, gender, and geographical location have once more asserted themselves as our country battles with COVID-19. The poor and the vulnerable are the hardest hit by the pandemic. They also bear the brunt of most of the measures put in place to cap the spread of the virus. For South Africa, as with the rest of the world, COVID-19 should serve as a reminder that none of us can afford to turn a blind eye on poverty and underdevelopment. COVID-19 has also exposed gaps in the provision of infrastructure to meet basic needs, such as healthcare, education, public transport, roads, water, sanitation, and housing. Accordingly, we in the African National Congress have begun reimagining and planning towards a post-COVID-19 South African economy. Our point of departure is that the new economy we are building must be more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable. We have taken the view that in building a post-COVID-19 economy, we need to go back to the fundamental insights contained in the Reconstruction and Development Program, what we call the RDP of the early 1990s. The RDP envisaged building a new economy by, among others, implementing effective programs to address the basic needs of our people. Guided by the RDP, we are of the view that through urban expansion and renewal, as well as the provision of infrastructure and services, particularly to historically excluded communities in rural and urban areas, conditions would be created to repair the broken structure of the South African economy by stimulating broad-based growth and job creation to reduce inequality, poverty, and unemployment, particularly amongst young people. We are also determined to ensure that the goals of the National Development Plan, Vision 2030, to reduce inequality, poverty, and unemployment find in the new economy that we are building. Of importance to us is the need to sharpen the implementation of our policies and programs. Some of the key elements of our plan for post-COVID-19 South African economy will include the following: massive expansion of social and economic infrastructure to meet basic needs, investments to improve the performance of our network industries as part of implementing structural reforms, strengthening local manufacturing and local content, whilst at the same time enabling participation of South African firms in continental and global value chains, strengthening trade and investment linkages with other countries, particularly on the African continent, but also in the world, mounting a skills revolution to build the right know-how required for jobs, industries, and the economy of the future. Greater focus will also be on mineral beneficiation, the green economy, and green industrialization, empowering small businesses, cooperatives, and informal enterprises, and also promoting the objectives of broad-based Black economic empowerment to ensure inclusion and redress. Program Director, to find our intervention during and after the pandemic, we will continue with efforts already underway to stabilize our public finances and reprioritize government spending. We will also mobilize local private sector funding and technical expertise. Government is already in discussion with international players such as the IMF, the World Bank, the New Development Bank, and the African Development Bank to raise in excess of $27 billion as part of our immediate health response to COVID-19 pandemic. We estimate that South Africa will require more than $100 billion for the post-COVID-19 reconstruction process to succeed. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the consequences of the pandemic has been that trust in public institutions and government, especially in our country, has risen. As is the case elsewhere in the world, the state is required to assume greater responsibility and role in the economy and society. Nevertheless, we are also aware that the capacity of the South African state has been weakened significantly over the years. This underscores the need to urgently rebuild an efficient, ethical, and developmental state capable of responding to the challenges of our time. The ANC is working hard to build a social compact to mobilize all stakeholders in support of interventions aimed at building a post-COVID-19 economy. This we are doing because we are aware that none of us acting alone can deliver what is required to build a new post-COVID-19 economy and to manage all the social and political consequences of the pandemic. As we build the social compact, we are inspired by the tremendous solidarity and compassion that has characterized the South African response to the pandemic. For instance, the Solidarity Fund created to augment public funds in the fight against the pandemic continues to receive generous contributions from individuals, and companies and organizations across South Africa, including the private sector. Similarly, individual South Africans and companies continue to assist the poor and the vulnerable with various contributions, including ensuring that people have food in their homes. All these acts of goodwill, compassion, and solidarity form the basis of an enduring social compact that is necessary in building an inclusive economy post-COVID-19. In the words of our President Cyril Ramaphosa, and I quote what he said, "Our economic strategy going forward will require a new social compact among all role players, business, labor, community, and government, to restructure the economy and achieve inclusive growth." Program Director, I trust that we can also rely on the support of our friends internationally, some of whom are listening this afternoon, as we journey towards a post-COVID-19 economy in South Africa. To all of you, we say South Africa is open for business. For us, the focus is now implementation. It is no longer business as usual. Program Director, I thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Paul Mashatile, Treasurer General of the African National Congress. For those of you who have joined a little bit late, Paul has been talking about South Africa's economic recovery beyond COVID-19. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And just a reminder for all of you, particularly those who came in late, that this meeting is fully on the record. Before we open up to more broad questions and answers, I have one more guest who wants to make some remarks. So I am really delighted to be welcoming him, and that's Enoch Gongolwane, who's the chair of the African National Congress's Economic Transformation Committee. Enoch, I know you're there. I've already seen your bookshelf, and I hope to hear some thoughts following those of Paul Mashatile. Enoch, the floor is yours.
Yeah, Chair, I think the Treasurer General has covered more ground. I just want to emphasize a specific dimension, and that is one of the things the coronavirus has reflected in relation of our social dynamics is the continued fault lines, apartheid fault lines. As you want people to do social distancing, precisely because of the nature of the housing we have, social distancing is not available, and the absence of water and other things make it deal to maintain a clean health. That's why we foreground our approach on the reconstruction and development program. That's the first rationale for it. But the second rationale is that we have learned out of our experience during the World Cup. If it's possible to stimulate demand via the infrastructure program, you'll see in the run-up to the highest level of construction ever reached in our economy was when we were building stadium for the World Cup. So part of our focus is global trade is going to be subdued, therefore export will be minimal. We've got to look at how do we, in our given circumstances, stimulate demand. Thank you.
Enoch, thank you very much. Very short and concise. So we've got hundreds of people listening, I can see, and I don't know how many people have joined us on Facebook Live. So my guesstimate is we're probably 450, 500 people. It's your choice now for those who are on Zoom to ask questions. If you could raise your hand, I will be able to see what questions you have, and I will then come to you. So with no more ado, let me start. There's excellent amount of questions coming in. Do also say whether they are to Paul Mashatile, the Treasurer General, or to Ednuk, who's made some remarks also. First of all, let's ask John Harker if you could ask your question, and please do tell us where you're from, what your affiliation is. John, you're very welcome. Let's hear your question. John, I can't hear you.
Is he unmuted?
He has unmuted, but I can't hear him. Maybe, John, we can't hear you, if you can send in your question written-wise to Q&A and we'll come to you. Let's ask the next person, David Kenvin. David, please ask your question and do tell us who you are.
My name is David Kenvin, and I'm the Vice Chair of Action for Southern Africa, which used to be the anti-apartheid movement. Those of us who spent 60 years of our lives in solidarity with South Africa and Southern Africa have, I suppose, a very simple view of this. We have an international health emergency. The World Health Organization have said it is an emergency. What can we do to help?
Okay, Paul, I'm going to take a couple of more questions because we've got so many and cluster them. Otherwise, we'll not be very democratic in this process. So
Okay.
the next question comes from Lawrence Freeman. Lawrence, please do tell us who you are, and you're very welcome.
I'm a political economic analyst for Africa. I've been working on Africa development policies for about 30 years in Africa. My question is to the Secretary General. One, I want to make sure I understood your figures correctly. You said there's going to be a negative 2% economic growth in 2020 and a negative 5% growth in 2021, if you could correct me on that. My question is that the South African President Ramaphosa, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed of Ethiopia and others are now calling for debt suspension to deal with the crisis. Do you favor a debt cancellation because the debt is so overbearing, and also the establishment of an international credit mechanism to fund massive infrastructure in Africa, which is, in my view, the biggest challenge we have, and it also will affect how we deal with the locust swarm, with food questions, if there's credit for energy, roads, rail, etc. Both things, the debt question and new credit. I would appreciate your response, sir.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. And the final question for this first cluster is Luigi Barberis. Luigi, please ask your question and do tell us who you are. Thank you very much. Luigi, can you hear us or can you speak? Yeah, please go ahead, Luigi. Yeah, you're on mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Okay. So I represent the international oil company ENI in South Africa, and I feel very safe here thanks to the responsible policy of the government in terms of facing COVID-19. I would like to ask a couple of questions. One is how strategic is the oil and gas sector in South Africa, and whether it is part of the economic recovery program. And the other question is about the new petroleum bill, which is being drafted by the government, which is a bit of concern for the oil companies. So do you think that the government could consider those concerns, taking into account also the oil price collapse and the sharp decline in consumption and of the oil products. Thank you very much.
Okay, Paul, it's over to you. Questions ranging from solidarity to business and the oil and gas industry. Over to you.
Yes, thanks a lot, Alex. Of course, with solidarity, as I said earlier, that we've seen a lot of solidarity in the past months with COVID, a lot of countries working together, supporting one another. So really the support as raised by David, the former anti-apartheid movement, who are saying, how can we help? Firstly, there are a lot of vulnerable people out there. You know, poverty levels are very high in South Africa. And we have set up, as I said earlier, this Solidarity Fund. So we'd really welcome contributions because, amongst others, the Solidarity Fund is procuring PPE, personal protective equipment, food for poor people out there. So really, support is needed all round. But as we are saying, there's a need to begin to move to rebuilding the economy. And therefore, we'd like to see more investors looking at various sectors as we open our economy, the energy sector, massive infrastructure investments that is going to be rolled out. Yes, so the answer is yes, we do need support and a lot of support. On negative growth, yes, indeed. I think, as I said earlier, that even before COVID, the South African economy has been growing at an average of 1.5% of our GDP, and now with COVID projecting negative growth. I have had some of the leaders in the continent calling for debt cancellation. Our president is currently chairing the African Union, so he is engaging with various leaders in the continent. And the plan is that we also need an Africa-wide response to rebuilding the economy. So we in South Africa and the ANC are not just looking at South Africa, but we're looking at the continent. So the move to raise new funding, whether in the form of credit and loans or grants, it's something that is going to take an Africa-wide approach so that we look at how we can assist the entire continent. So yes, I'm in support of these things being looked at currently, particularly mobilizing new support. I did say in my input earlier that Africa actually will be looking in excess of $100 billion to be able to reconstruct the economies of the various countries. Oil and gas, very critical. I'm sure Enoch will want to say something here. We're looking at various ways to strengthen energy security. And I'm particularly very supportive to introduce gas bigger in our economy. There are a lot of countries surrounding South Africa that has a lot of gas that we can begin to pull in a big way into our economy. And of course, yeah, we need to look at the issue with the prices of oil now. There is a concern from oil companies whether they will survive. There have been a lot of talk, including some of the companies based here that are having it difficult. But government is looking at measures to support various industries. We have started with various relief funds, supporting both big and small firms to ensure that they survive. But yes, the energy sector is quite key for us. We are actually busy currently looking at the idea of coming up with a new generation company but also retrofitting some of our old power stations, and some of them should be changed to gas, and making sure that we have enough energy to power the new economic recovery as we build the new economy. So Alex, maybe Enoch might want to add.
Thanks, TG. Let me just start with the oil and gas issue and the petroleum bill. Oil and gas is strategic for come from. And we understand the challenges that we have is that the first discoveries that we've seen now are right in the deep sea, and there's challenges with the waves and other things. So it's not it's a hostile environment. What that means, we've got to create a legislation which is basically makes an incentive for people to go that deep. That's the first point. The second point is that why we are creating that bill is that in the past, both oil and gas and mining were clumped under one legislation, the MPRDA. At the moment, we're trying to treat the oil and gas industry separately. And therefore, we're creating this petroleum bill. That discussion, to my understanding, it has been a very fruitful discussion. Even in the transition from the MPRDA, the transition clause was drafted with industry. There has been an engagement with industry, and we continue to do so. In addition, we will be calling in our post-COVID document for sectoral plans. We would therefore encourage the oil and gas industry to submit what is the vision about the oil and gas industry in South Africa and what the party and government should do. On the action for Southern Africa, I'm quite excited. All I can say at the moment, our international relations department has been discussing how to reunite with our friends and in the anti-apartheid movement. Would welcome any cooperation and working together with you. Insofar as a cancellation of debt and the expenditure, on infrastructure in Africa, the World Bank published a document on infrastructure in Africa. Among other things, it said, just on sub-Saharan Africa, to catch up, we'll have to spend about $93 billion per annum, just to catch up. Now, the virus has complicated the problem, which means that that 93 billion may be peanuts if you compare to what the World Bank has published. So for countries, particularly the low-income countries, for them to cope with that expenditure, burdened with that is a challenge. So the president would, of course, as chair of the African Union, be charged to speak on behalf of all the African Union in relation to the debt cancellation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Enoch. So let's have some more questions. I'm going to ask Nkanyiso Malaba if you can ask your question. So very welcome. Do tell us where you're from. Nkanyiso, could you unmute yourself and ask your question? Thank you.
Alex. Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Very much so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Name is Nkanyiso Malaba. I'm the CEO of LNN Capital in KZN. My question is very simple and direct. What is government's intervention towards the informal and township economy post-COVID-19? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very clear. The next one I'll ask is Jean-Baptiste Bukuru. Jean-Baptiste, you're very welcome. Please come and ask your question.
Thank you. I'm in Moscow, Russia. I'm a postgraduate at People's Friendship University of Russia, and I'm from Burundi. My question is about maybe the panelist can say something about what is being done by BRICS states, member states. As we know, there are relations between these 5 countries. They were even before this pandemic, COVID-19. What is being done to recover economy? I mean, joint efforts taken by the states, if you can say something about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Baptiste. And just to add to Jean-Baptiste's question, I'm going to use the prerogative of the chair. I believe, Paul, the next BRICS summit is in Moscow. What are your expectations from the next BRICS summit? The previous one was obviously hosted by South Africa. Let me ask Simon Fremantle, please. Simon, would you be able to ask a question and introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Alex. Just a question to both Mr. Gorongwana and Mr. Mashatile. On the new post-COVID-19 economy, which was mentioned several times in the initial remarks, I just wonder, is this a new policy framework, or is it, does it sync with the various policy frameworks that are already in existence? I ask because it does seem as though there's a number of different frameworks that certainly inform government policy at the moment, between obviously the National Development Plan, general talk of the need for radical economic transformation, National Treasury's growth plan, which speaks of structural reform, President Ramaphosa's mention in 2018 of economic and stimulus plan, which has some different aspects to it. And then Mr. Mashatile, in your remarks, you spoke about, you referred back to the RDP as well. So I'm just wondering, how do we conceptualize the new post-COVID-19 economy within the context of these various frameworks that government and the ANC have been promoting for some time? Thank you.
Okay, Paul and Enoch, back to you for answering the questions. Thank you very much. Enoch, I think you want to say something first?
Yeah, let me shoot first, and the TG sought me out. Let me start with Simon. When I saw Standard Bank, I suspected it's going to be you, Simon, on the list. Let me start with that. If you read the statement of the National Executive Committee, it refers to what it calls post-COVID reconstruction. That's the statement of the National Executive, and therefore have tasked the Economic Transformation Committee, which I share, with trying to assist the ANC to think through that process. It's a difficult, as you will know, it's a tall order. What will it be different from other frameworks? We're trying not to distinguish it from other frameworks, precisely for the same reason you're asking. We don't, our critics normally say we're good at churning documents, but less on implementation. So what we're trying to achieve with that document is, given the policy frameworks that we have, how can we pull that together and focus on implementation? That's what distinguished that. That's why we say the RDP is there, the NDP is there, there's a whole range of this document. The NDP, our targets, we may not meet them for a variety of reasons. What we will be focusing on is how do we give effect to those policy frameworks without reproducing new policy. That's what we're trying to achieve. Insofar as the BRICS emergence, I'll deal with emergence, not with the summit. I'll deal with the emergency support to the different member states. BRICS has set aside about $5 billion, the BRICS Bank, as an emergency fund amongst the member states. And they are beginning to disperse already. China, India, and Russia have already got, there's a process to provide support to both Brazil and South Africa. So that process is there. The question from KZN which was simple and straightforward. I think we premised our assumption on the fact that we say part of our weaknesses has not been dealing with the housing and other things in the townships. Therefore, we can't achieve social distancing. Massive investment is needed in those areas. That's what the document is going to also be talking about. TJ?
Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, let me just, I think we obviously, government is providing a lot of relief to businesses and firms. That, of course, includes small, medium enterprises, particularly in the townships. We're going to look at how we can assist. That's why there was this discussion that perhaps we should start easing of the lockdown regulation to allow businesses to resume, because most small businesses in the townships are affected. There is a department of small businesses in South Africa, and they are looking at ways in which they can assist small enterprises to once again recover and come back to trade, particularly in the environment that we call the township economy. With BRICS summit, obviously now that we're coming post, the summit will happen post COVID pandemic. Expectations are going to change, but I guess many participants will be looking at how to revitalize their economies. And I'm sure the summit will spend a lot of time focusing on recovery, basically. The summit, when it was held in South Africa, we focused a lot on attracting foreign direct investments to various sectors of the South African economy, the energy sector, etc. So I guess that's probably going to be a big focus. How do we rebuild our economy? Just beyond member states of BRICS, I'm sure other participants that are going to come there. But others, I think Enoch has answered the other issues. On just to reiterate on the policy frameworks, that we're actually pulling these together. So Alex, the RDP and in a sense the NDP are not at variance. And what the NEC said that let's pull these together. We're actually working on the document now that has taken into account what the Minister of Finance would have said just before COVID, around the time of his budget speech, together to make sure that we come with a very integrated approach, but focusing mainly on implementation. Because the ANC has a lot of good policies and plans, and that's why I was saying my input, the period going ahead now, the focus is going to be a lot on implementation, and particularly accelerated implementation of our plans.
Thank you, Paul. Let's take a few more questions. We have Gwyneth Boswell. Gwyneth, can you ask a question, please?
Hello, I'm Professor Gwyneth Boswell from the University of East Anglia in the UK. I think that tourism makes an important contribution to your economy. What can your government do to help this recover after the pandemic? And not unconnected to this, can you do anything to develop the positive effects of the lockdown on the countryside into more eco-friendly policies?
Thank you very much. Mark Stadler, please ask your question. Mark, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, sorry about that. Good afternoon. Just the scale of unemployment was already a major issue for South Africa going into this crisis with 29% unemployment. It's now likely to get to 50% during the course of this year. That inevitably is going to shutter demand even further. And I suppose the question around this is how the plans which were pre-COVID. You've got your reconstruction of basic jobs, getting people back to work. It's not going to come through many of these plans, I don't think, because when you're at 50%, your needs and requirements are going to be totally different. So I'd be interested to hear how getting people back to work is going to be done, and that's in the framework of where you've got debt to GDP already at 80% and on an upward trajectory. Nearly 20% of your tax revenues are just going in servicing debt. So this seems to me like the perfect storm, is that we've taken the country back from a not a particularly strong position, and so there's sort of these perhaps idealistic views on sort of opening up to sort of greater foreign investment and things like that just don't really feel to me to be terribly pragmatic in a period where you're going to have half of your population or working age population as being unemployed. So how are you going to tailor your near-term policies to actually address this real need of trying to get people back into even basic low-paid jobs? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm going to read out a couple of questions that have come in through Q&A so that our questioners feel that they're also had a chance to ask a question. The first one that I have here is from Judith McGregor, and she says the South African health response has been rightly praised, but the social and economic problems that now face the country are considerable. Can the Treasurer General explain what has now changed so that the effective reforms of the state-owned enterprises and infrastructure can happen? Will there now be a genuine consensus for action across all parts of the ANC? What will be different? And then I also have a question from Fundile Mapanga. Fundile is the Chief Operations Officer at the Agenda 2063 Academy in Eswatini. Fundile's question is, what is the role of South Africa's government within the Southern African development community with regards to the regional responses to a post-COVID-19 world? Fundile also is asking about the African Continental Free Trade Area. Is it seen as a platform to provide coordination with fellow SADC countries to provide solutions to healthcare, food security, and other industries? So those are the questions, Paul. Over to you again.
Yes, Alex, thank you very much. Firstly, on the tourism side, it's true that tourism has been one of the biggest contributors to our GDP. I think averaging around 9% or so. Now with the closing of borders and people not traveling, obviously tourism has been hard hit. We are going to have to look at measures on how to revive tourism, hopingly beyond post the pandemic, people will start traveling again, but I'm sure it will take time. The Department of Tourism obviously will also, I agree, will have to look at other eco-friendly tourism initiative, encouraging local tourism, as international tourism might take a bit of time for people to come back. But yes, I agree, this is one of our major areas of contribution to our economy, and it is actually in the mix. I may not have touched on it earlier, but in the document we're working on, we are looking at the issue of tourism. Mark, you are quite right. Unemployment was already high before the the pandemic. It has gotten worse. At the moment, we estimate about 1.8 million jobs to be lost in this period, and therefore increasing the level of unemployment, especially amongst young people. So when we redesign our reconstruction program, the rebuilding the new economy, I've indicated earlier that we'll push for massive infrastructure investments. And most of these initiatives will going to make sure that they are going into labor-intensive sectors to be able to employ more people, expanded public works programs. So the drive must be growth that is accompanied by jobs to be able to deal with this challenge. But I agree that it's a major challenge that we are facing. I'll ask Enoch to deal with the other two questions.
One of the questions posed was a political question in relation to whether is there a consensus, what somebody called the alliance part, the ANC parts, we call them the alliance partners. Today, a document will be released which has been part of work of trying to find consensus among the alliance partners over the past 3 months. So there has been some work done in order to achieve consensus on that. Even the call for a reconstruction, post-coronavirus reconstruction, is a consensus position amongst the alliance partners. The second thing, I will lump the SADC and with the African Continental Free Trade into one question. We are working very closely with all our SADC partners, including the African continent as chair of AU. South Africa is working with all the African countries on this program. And there's a consensus. Even yesterday, there's been a document which says the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is going to be probably the most effective way of a response for all of us on the African continent. So we are working with everybody in this regard. Coming to the unemployment issue, just to add one dimension to it, we're not going to say it's going to be an easy task. Part of it was related to structure of the economy itself, but also structural employment, which is also reflects a number of issues on its own, including the skills mismatch and other areas. So that work is not going to be an easy work. We're not going to be misleading people, but it is our challenge. It is our view that we need to do a lot of work, including public employment programs, to deal particularly with the unskilled labor force. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Paul and Enoch, do you have time for me to take one more round of questions? There are many people, so it will be about another 5 minutes. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So I'm going to then ask Amy Gutman. Amy, if you could ask your question, please. And do tell us who you are.
Thank you, Alex. This is Amy Gutman. I report for BBC and Forbes, among others. My question is about land reform. I know that this amendment to the Constitution has been in the works for some time. It's also been severely delayed. My question is, how much will land reform, though it was already in motion, now play a role in the recovery plans? And what is the timeline for getting this bill forward?
Thank you very much. The next question is from John Battersby. John, if you could ask your question, please. Hello, John.
Yes, can you hear me now, Alex?
Yeah, I can. Please go ahead.
Okay, good. Thanks very much. Yes, a question for Paul Mashatile. Paul, I wondered if you could give us an update on the government's campaign to end corruption, and particularly to deal with the corruption during the era of the former president.
Okay. I've got just two more questions that we can take. So, Kule Duma, if you'd like to ask your question, please. Are you there, Kule?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Okay, please ask your question. You're welcome.
Great. Thank you. So my name is Kule, and I work in international government relations at Anglo American. And just a quick question to both. We know that the kind of 4IR and the technologies that are going to come in with that are going to be accelerated by COVID. And so in the kind of reconstruction plans that we have going forward, is there any thinking about that and potential impact on jobs in any way?
Thank you very much, Kule. And the final question is one that came in through Q&A, and it's from Razia Khan from Standard Chartered Bank. Razia asked the question, how are the public sector compensation negotiations progressing? Is there now broad-based buy-in to create the space for investment and future growth, even with the union partners? So that was a question from Razia Khan. Paul and Enoch, over to you for the final round of answers.
Yes, thanks, Alec. Enoch, you want to start? Should I start?
Maybe I should start, TJ, and leave the ones that career limiting to you. Let me start with the land reform question. The land reform has become at the center of this post-COVID reconstruction. If you want to build houses, you need land. If you want to make more impressive on the rural parts of our country, you need land. So land reform is going to be central on whatever we do. There are two processes that are three pillars of land reform at the moment. The first one is land tenure, is to make sure that those who have got no tenure, but they've occupied land, they can provide tenure. The second thing is restitution. That process is going on. We want to emphasize on redistribution. Redistribution makes sure that we can make available whatever state land that's available at the moment. That process is in place. Land has been identified, which is state land, and where appropriate, we will get more land. We're not going to wait for changes in the Constitution before we can start with the redistribution program. The redistribution program was permanent since 1994. We've got to continue with it, and it's quite critical at the moment. I leave the corruption issue to career limiting to the TG. And then on the 4IR, it's so critical. There's a debate, I think, global as to what is going to be the new normal. Whichever way you look at it, that new normal will have a greater digital component in it, where there's new forms of work or everything of that sort. So it's going to also be a central part of the discussion. I leave corruption and compensation. And Razia has asked a punching question at the tail end. I leave it to you, TG.
Yeah, just to say, maybe firstly on the 4IR, that one of the things that we're busy with at the moment, as the ANC, we've asked the government to fast track the issue of the provision of spectrum to mobile companies, increase access to digitization, particularly even in rural areas. As you can see, with the COVID, we are a bit exposed because connectivity doesn't go far. And we need it a lot now, even in the education space, Yes, Pule Duma was saying that what about jobs? It will affect jobs, but you need to look at, as Enoch is saying, a new normal will mean you provide new forms of skills to people. What I spoke about earlier about the skills revolution must take into account that we are moving into the fourth industrial revolution. On corruption, Alex, there are a number of issues that we started dealing with. If you recall that when President Ramaphosa was appointed, one of the first things to do was to get a number of commissions to start looking at various sectors. There was a commission that looked at the operations of the PIC, looking at SARS, and those institutions are now restructured. There are new boards, and in some of them, new CEOs are appointed. There are new boards at ESCOM. There's a new CEO at Transnet. The approach was that you need to get the governance of these institutions right. Appoint people with integrity, with the requisite skills, etc. Of course, the issue of wrongdoing continued to be investigated. The Zondo Commission is still on. It has not completed its work. It's looking at what happened in the past. But the determination of the ANC to root out corruption is in place. And I think it's supported by all these efforts that I'm mentioning, that we are looking at all these institutions. I said earlier in my input that we want to make sure that corruption is uprooted from all institutions, but also we're looking at the private sector as well. It's not just government institution. So I'm happy with what is happening, what government is doing. I think there is a lot of commitment to clean government or clean governance across the board, whether you start at local government level, the provincial government, national government department, and all state-owned enterprises. On the public sector wage agreements, the discussions are still going on. Just a few days ago, the top six of the ANC and the Alliance leadership, COSATU and the SACP, met and re-looked at this issue. And we've agreed that the way the engagements are taking place, led by the Minister of Public Administration, are being handled properly. Let's give that space to see how we can resolve that, particularly given that we have this new environment of COVID-19 where resources have been heavily depleted. But those engagements are continuing, and I'm sure in the very near future, we will know how to conclude them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much to Enoch. You've been very erudite and provided even extra time. We moved into extra time by about 10 minutes to take more questions and answers. So I don't think I need to do anything more, except as the director of the Africa program at Chatham House, thank you both very much for engaging with us and our audience today. As I said, I think we had more or less 500 people joining us. And to remind those who are following this meeting that it was fully on the record, and we hope you will join us again. We are planning a series of meetings on South Africa. So Paul, please stay safe, and thank you for participating. It's a shame we didn't physically host you this time, but post-COVID-19, you can rest assured we will be inviting you to be physically at Chatham House to present. So thank you. And Enoch also, please keep safe, and thank you for being with us today. Thank you, both of you, and good afternoon.